Hey, silent listeners, Happy New Year! We're so happy to be back with you sharing the stories that amplify sickle cell disease. And in today's episode of Silent Podcast, we talk with Carla Lewis, CEO and founder of an organization called Kids Conquering Sickle Cell Disease. Carla was one of our 2022 grant recipients of the Ebony Lanier Sickle Cell Grant. And at the end of last year, Ijeoma and I had an opportunity to sit down with Carla to learn about her journey as a sickle cell advocate, to hear about her son's journey battling sickle cell, and to learn how a grant from the Ruby Ball impacted their journey.
One thing he said to me, he said, Mom, and came to my room and he said, Mom, I got to talk to you. And I was like, okay. So he said, I want to go to school. I want to be with my friends and my peers. And I tried everything within me not to fight back tears, but it brought me to a place of, oh my gosh, how this disease is impacting his life that he knows. And he said, I'm not living my life. That took me to tears.
Welcome to the Silent Podcast, where our focus is to strike out the silenced voices of those affected by sickle cell disease. We believe that by creating a platform to talk about real-life situations through the lens of sickle cell, we can change the stigma one voice at a time. Each episode, we will feature individuals who are changing the narrative of sickle cell. We hope that by sharing these stories, this podcast will inspire not only those living with the disease, but anybody that's listening to boldly persevere, confidently speak their truth, and courageously follow their dreams. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Silent Podcast. I'm your co-host, Christina Lachelle.
And I'm Ijeoma and
So I know it's been a while, but we are so excited to be bringing you back some podcasts. We've had an opportunity to meet lots of folks and make connections, and we have such an incredible guest for you today.
Yes, I know. I don't remember the last podcast that we had, but I know everybody's been wondering when we bring him back the Silent Podcast, and it is here. So as we're closing out the year, we're really looking forward to what we have coming up in the next year. The guest that we had for the podcast today was very special because they actually were one of the grant recipients for our Ebony Lanier scholarship that we did last year for the first time, which we've brought back again for the end of this year. And so it was really good to have her on the podcast, share a little bit about how getting that grant helped her, and then just share some of her stories. So thinking about our guest makes me think about our voice of truth. During our conversation with her, she mentioned living life. Mm-hmm. And so with that, the voice of truth. And in the end, it's not the years in your life that count. It's the life in your years. Mm. And so when I think about that, there's so many things that happen that we're concerned about, right? And that we worry about. And so it's like you have to allow yourself to live. And so I felt like that was the biggest thing that I took out of the conversation with her, was living. And so giving her son the opportunity to make his own decision and to actually be able to live life to the fullest. And so I'm super excited to share her story. Christina, what was your favorite part of the conversation?
Yeah, I loved hearing her speaking about living, because it wasn't just about her son living his life, right, through a stem cell transplant, but it was also about her living her life, right, letting him go, and what that meant to her as someone who had been a caregiver all of her life. So I really enjoyed that, hearing her story.
Awesome. So let's not hold everybody up. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Okay, before we get into it, though, can we just honor Ijeoma's hair? Like, it's very cute. She's got a curl going on with a bang that's swooped to the side. If you're watching the podcast, you can see this, but if you are listening, you can't. Very cute. We love this book on Ijeoma. Thank you very much.
Are we really fitting this in?
Very, very cute.
Really?
Yes.
This description. Ooh, if only you knew.
Okay, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into this podcast. I'm so excited to share Carla Lewis and her conversation. All right, silent listeners, we are with Carla Lewis. She is the CEO and founder of Kids Conquering Sickle Cell Disease Foundation based in Orlando, Florida. Carla is a devoted mother and advocate whose native background is from the Caribbean island of Jamaica, West Indies. Carla is nationally recognized health advocate and public speaker with over 16 years of experience. She's dedicated to leveraging her skills and experience to amplify caregivers, patients' voices, to reduce healthcare disparities and to increase access to treatments. Carla is a compassionate advocate for those living with sickle cell and rare diseases. Her advocacy journey began in April 2002 when she gave birth to her son diagnosed with sickle cell disease. In 2004, Carla started this first sickle cell support group at a local children's hospital in Orlando, Florida, which provided educational events, hospital visits, resources, and awareness to bridge the gap in the community. Today, again, she's the CEO and founder of Kids Conquering Sickle Cell Disease based in Orlando, Florida. The organization exists so children and families that strive to fight challenges with serious life-threatening hemoglobin disorders are empowered with education and resources. Carla, we're so excited to have you, and I just want to welcome you to our show. Welcome.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. We're so excited to talk to you about one thing that Christina didn't mention in the bio, that Carla was the recipient of one of our grants last year. And so it's that time of year again where we'll be sharing the Ebony Lanier needs-based grant. And so we are really excited to have Carla on the show today to just share a little bit about herself, her story, being a mother of a child living with sickle cell, and just her story as she talks about like advocacy. So we really appreciate you, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before we start, what would you say is a word that you would say marks your journey as a sickle cell caregiver, or just in the sickle cell space in general?
I want to say that word might be triumph, because it's been hills and valleys, definitely some moments to smile, but definitely some moments of, definitely hardship, I would say. The times where that puts you in the mood to pretty much grow your strength, and being able to really get empowered from the journey. So definitely, I feel that that's the word that fits my journey.
I love that
Nice.
word.
I love it. Triumph. I love it. So, Carla, Christina shared during your bio that you are a caregiver to a son with sickle cell. So can you tell us a little bit about when you first found out that your child had sickle cell?
Yes, it was very difficult learning when my child when I first learned about his diagnosis. I first had the newborn screening, a letter that gave me indication that it was abnormal. Then I spoke to his doctor about it, and she said, let me look into this a little bit further. And she also got a notice, and she referred me to the hematologist. They eventually, after a couple visits, confirmed that he was sickle beta thalassemia. I want to say that it took about 3 months for that confirmation. During that time, I was asking many questions. Are you sure? That was one. And I also wanted to know, first thing, so how can I connect with other patients and parents? And when the physician said, we don't have such thing, I was like, what? So the other thing I asked was, so how do you get updated information? What conferences you attend in order to get more information about sickle cell and treatments? And he basically shared that resources were low for sickle cell. And remember, this is 2002, right? So back then also, when you think there was particularly not much conversation so much about sickle cell, but I knew that I had to connect with parents. I had to connect with more health professionals that knew more about it. So I kind of surfed the internet and found the National Sickle Cell Association and reached out to them. And back then they had a chat room. And the chat room kind of connected you with patients and caregivers, which was awesome, just asking questions, wanting to get to know each other. And I saw a mom on that chat group that had 2 children that were Caucasian, and she lived in Florida. So I was like, wow, she lives in Florida. She's right near my area. I'm learning about sickle cell. I'm going to connect with her. And I did. And her name is Vicky. She became one of my best advocates in order to help educate me about sickle cell. And she's now the mother of 3 children with sickle cell. And connecting with parents was very much important to me. So I decided that even in my area, I would they had one thing that was unique about the clinic visits was they had sickle cell day. So basically I knew that everyone that was in the clinic, they had a child with sickle cell. So that kind of was like, well, there's parents. So I would show up, sit next to one and just start speaking, share my number, do the same thing each time I go and just kind of make connections. One thing that struck me, because learning about the illness is one thing, and having a child, an infant with it is another thing. One thing that struck me, I remember the first time I walked into the clinic with my son in order to get checked. And his mom came up to me. She was in there with her child because, of course, it's blood diseases. And she came to me and she's like, let me see your new baby. And she said, so what's wrong with him? And I was just like, oh my gosh. That was the first time it struck me, something's wrong. I'm literally in here in my hematology clinic in order to get him, retested. And I had tears in my eyes after that because I was like, wow, my newborn is struck with something now that I have to learn more about and make it priority that that he receives the best care. So even fast forward into that journey, meeting other parents, I wanted that for them. So being able to connect with them, making sure their child have the best care also, and learning from each other, because I saw us older kids, I was pretty much that mom that wanted information, wanted to know the journey, even though I was asking, patients when I was trying to connect. I wanted to know everyone's experience and know what am I facing as a mom.
Yeah. And I love how you did that, because just as I have sickle cell, and I have a twin brother and a younger sister that also have sickle cell, and that's really my introduction into like the space. But growing up, I didn't know anybody else outside of my family members, outside of my twin brother and my sister, because again, it goes back to being a silent disease. It wasn't something that my parents wanted to talk about, that my mom, literally, it was a stigma. So I knew nobody, I knew nothing. And so just like how you said when you met Vicky, that kind of touched me, from you being a caregiver and you meeting somebody and you're like, oh, she's in the same space as me. And she helped to educate you a little bit more in that space. That's how I felt about Ebony, who the grant was named after, because she was the first person that I met outside of my family that had sickle cell, and she helped to educate me about sickle cell so that I was able to learn more about my illness and my disease. So I love what you're doing as a parent, starting, like how you said, when your son was an infant, like getting to get that knowledge and better understanding and connecting with other people and getting to know their stories so that that can help you as you continue to be the mother that you want to be to your son. So I love you sharing that.
I also love the power of community that you're talking about. You know, a lot of my friends, when they have children, they want to connect with a community of parents in general, right? And so, you know, I think what you have created or were thinking about even when your son was born was just like, all right, how can I create this community of people that can rally around me and support me, you know, in this journey? Because I mean, and I think that's probably the question I have for you. Like, it's not easy to have a child with you know, with sickle cell, or any sort of illness at all. Like you mentioned, you know, thinking about something being wrong with your son just kind of brought tears to your eyes. So how has that journey, or how was that journey for you, and maybe how has it evolved?
Yes. I want to say, for me, Shamar, my son, was first, I would say, I can't say complications so much from sickle cell itself. The first 6 years, lots of fevers. The first hospitalization was at 3 months old. He had bronchitis. And I remember just feeling like overwhelmed. He had a cold and just wouldn't go away. And his doctor said, bring him in. And I wasn't expecting him to get, admitted, but he got admitted and realized that, how important it was for him to even show up there and be evaluated, and them taking it very seriously to make sure that it doesn't begin a process of having complications just from having bronchitis. So then it was being admitted for fevers and, risk of infections. So we had years of being admitted and even going to the clinic just because of precautions and, flows of whether it's pneumonia, whether it's bronchitis, those things. In respect to, having a sickle cell crisis, I have to say his first pain crisis had to be somewhere around the age of 6.
Yeah,
I believe he had one at 2.
Yeah, because I was going to say, when did you realize, like, that he had his first crisis, and what was that like for you as a mother when you realized having a crisis and you were like, because it's one thing to get a diagnosis and it's another thing for the diagnosis to
manifest,
be in effect. So how was that for you when you first had to go through him being in crisis?
So I believe he was having some pain at 2, but to the point that it might have been minor, because he kept touching his back and wouldn't say much. So I kind of brung him in, and, by the time I got him in and he put him on fluids, he really didn't, it subsided. So back then it was just like, was it I questioned myself, was it a crisis? Was it not? But the way he was fidgety and was crying at home, I really believe that's when he probably had his first crisis. But fast forward into when he was 6, when he can identify this pain, and when the pain started to hit, I really know it was in the same place in the back. And then it always, started from the back and always would wake him up. So it would always start in early morning, waking him up out of his sleep. So that was hard for me, because having a child now communicate to you, I'm hurting, and being able to tell you that they're hurting in a way that you wish you can take on that pain yourself. I was able to control the pain with actually Tylenol and Motrin. And that time that we understand that was his level of pain. being able to tame it with Tylenol and Motrin. When he became an adolescent, before that, at the age of 9, Shamar basically experienced an aplastic crisis and went into a full-blown crisis. And that was the first time he experienced pain at a level of, they say 10, I say 20.
Yeah, because I think with people with sickle cell, it's like when they tell them, what's your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? If somebody with sickle cell says 5, it's really a 10, you know?
Yes, yes.
That is really a 20. And so just even like seeing it from that perspective and knowing that. But yeah, continue.
And can you explain for our listeners what an aplastic crisis is?
Basically, it's when your hemoglobin pretty much shuts down the making of your red blood cells. He had realized the day when that day happened to be our blessed day and our worst day. He actually had a clinic appointment and was doing, fairly well, no issues, but had a clinic appointment, regular to check his hemoglobin, regular hematology visit. And when he went in, they realized his hemoglobin was a little bit lower than normal. So they basically said, okay, let me recheck this. And by that time, we had traveled home. Actually, it was my husband at the time. He traveled with him home, and I was at work, so I would usually call because we switch gears because you have to be able to value your time when you're working and have a sick child, so you have to juggle. So in that, when he got home, they said, you know what, we need him to come right back, and returned back to the clinic. Once he returned back to the clinic, they realized it was lower than they first took it. Oh. So they called me at work and basically explained to me one thing only. They said, we don't want to scare you, but we need you to pack your bags immediate for you and Shamar and get to the hospital immediately. He will have a room waiting for him. Now, if that's not something a parent is going to be scared of, I don't know. Yeah. So I was a little bit lost in, okay, what is this? And they said, well, we're going to, recheck, and, he's going to need some blood, and his hemoglobin's a little low, a bit low. And we want to recheck. That time, Shamar's hemoglobin pretty much would run maybe about a 10, 9 on a bad day. So his hemoglobin ran about that. When he went into the clinic, they realized his hemoglobin was a 6. So immediately they knew something was wrong. And then when he went back again for that second drawing, they realized it was a 5. So they knew something was definitely wrong. By the time they took more tests, when I actually rushed home. I don't know how I packed a bag so quick, but I pretty much threw things together. And, I was asking, how do you feel? And he was like, well, just had a little pain, in my back. And I was asking them, I said, well, he's at a clinic. You told me he looked good. I spoke to you, and it was like, well, but, his blood test is indicating otherwise. And within that time, I said, all right, we're going to rush into the hospital. It was literally, I was in my car, probably like 15-minute drive, and I could see him curled up in a fetal position. He was in excruciating pain. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even get to start to give you Motrin or anything. I'm going to stop at the store. I got to get Motrin now, because we have an hour drive to the hospital. And I was like, I have to get you something in your system. So, of course, I rushed out to a store, get some Motrin, give it to him. He was in excruciating pain, and I've never seen him like that. I never seen him at that type of pain level. Remember, I said it was Tylenol and Motrin that I was used to. By the time I got to the hospital, I just got to the emergency, and literally there was a team of health professionals at the door at the emergency room, just literally waiting there outside at the door to get him. And when I pull up, I knew it was something really, really concerning, because if they're at the door waiting for me and they knew I was on my way, something was wrong. So we went in and they took him instantly. And of course, they're running, taking blood again, running cultures, matching, all this stuff that they wanted to do at the hospital. And a team came in and basically said that, that they believe he have parvo, and they believe it's probably a head start on it, but they wanted to see. And the sad thing was they couldn't address the pain because it was more important to get him blood at the time. So he was just in excruciating pain while they find, blood. So thank you to the blood donors, because you're saving lives, and that's so important. And he fought for his life for 2 weeks. That visit showed me that you can look good in a day, and in a matter of hours, your life can change, and with complications, involving from sickle cell. So you have to be alert at all times. And when they tell you and they teach us as parents and about temperatures, making sure if you're running a temperature, that 101, make sure you definitely take that seriously. Remember, my son didn't have any symptoms. The symptom was when they took the blood. So the challenge was when he got home. If that was a school day, I always think if that was a school day, I wouldn't know until I see him curled up or the pain started to hit, because there was no fever. It was the pain that basically, from having a low hemoglobin, that started to trigger because of the low hemoglobin, and that kind of sparked things that were going on. So you can't even wait. When you do notice something, alarming, definitely get it checked out. I was lucky that was his clinic day. So he wound up fighting for his life for 2 weeks in the hospital. Thank God he's here today. And I can definitely say it haven't been an easy road, and I'll talk more about our journey.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you shared that story, because it is true. Sickle cell is very unpredictable. And so just even how you shared the fact of not knowing, and how he had the clinic day, he looked fine at the clinic day. And that's why we have these shirts actually that we have where it says, this is what sickle cell looks like. There is an effect of sickle cell, even when you are in pain or when you're dealing with certain things. I wanted to circle back a little bit, how we kind of mentioned how we first got connected to you, right? With the last year, us having the Ebony Lanier needs-based grant. And so just wanted to touch in that in terms of what made you reach out in terms of completing that, and just share a little bit about your story in there, and where you've been since then.
Okay, so I want to circle back to my son and the hardship of sickle cell. So I mentioned before that at the early stages that he really had very mild crisis, and then he had this aplastic crisis. When he turned 12, sickle cell showed its face like none other. So when he became 12 years old, right before 12, that's in middle school, his last elementary school, 5th grade, was a hard year for him. For some reason, the challenges of having crisis was very frequent, and it just kept getting, just more frequent. And as a parent, that is very difficult. He was in and out of the hospital, to the point I came to register one day when we was going into the emergency room, and walked up to the desk, and the lady said, "Okay, it's okay. I have all the information. I know your name." And I was just like, oh my gosh. And that showed just how much we were there. And at that time, he was having a very challenging time. When he entered middle school, the first day of middle school, I talked to the teachers, kind of got acclimated, let them know. Well, that first day, they had to call me to come and get him. I realized that it was too difficult for him. We knew that 5th grade was hard, But now he was in middle school and the challenge was going to be even more. He went that day. I had a 5th grade teacher pretty much communicate with me, and she said, "Mom, he may need to be in a hospital homebound program." And they will help him through this, being educated and, still being able to access his care, and it can be okay. And I had to think about that because he was having a very challenging time going in and out of the hospital. And he had to be a hospital homebound student for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
I had to talk to him and encourage him and tell him, like, each semester that we're going to evaluate things, how you're doing. But it was challenging. Almost every other month he was in the hospital. The crisis began to last for a whole month. Even when he came out the hospital, being able to be treated with morphine, no longer Tylenol and Motrin, being able to be able to treat with morphine. Eventually, we had to go to Dilaudid because that morphine was no longer helping, and being able to just see how he copes. Mm-hmm. And it was his doctor that came to me and said, "Mom, he was in and out. And every semester I would talk to his physician and just kind of talk. One day the physician said, we need to have a talk." And my son was in the bed, he was in the hospital, and he said, "You have to really think about some options of treatment for Shamar, because he can't go on like this." And at the time that we had a choice of hydroxyurea, doing blood exchange, or he said, think about bone marrow transplant. At the time, I was asking, I was that mom, fear to even try different treatments, but I was asking and doing research on different things. And I was like, well, we're going to try something, because he wasn't getting better. This going in and out the hospital was challenging.
So this is something that you touched on. There's something that you touched on earlier, was when you found out your son's genotype, and you said that he had sickle plus beta thalassemia, correct? And
yes.
So one of the things that have been a thing within the sickle cell community is when they try to talk about the different genotypes, and they say that SS is the most severe type of sickle cell. And so wanting to dispel that myth, because I also live with sickle plus beta thal. And so having that understanding of, even within the same genotype or within different genotypes, they present differently, but it doesn't mean that one is more severe than the other, because just as you said, your son has sickle plus beta, but he was chronically in the hospital, which is what they normally say is for an individual that has SS. And so I wanted to just touch on that and really put that out there as you go into the conversation about your son and the options that your doctor presented and shared with him, because I feel that a lot of people don't truly understand that when it comes to that conversation around genotypes and the different types of genotypes, and not putting them against each other, but understanding that it doesn't matter what genotype that you have. If you have sickle cell, you have sickle cell, and there are different types of curative therapies and different types of things that can help you through your journey, regardless of what it is. So just because you have sickle beta doesn't mean that you can't be a candidate for you going through the bone marrow transplant. And so I'm glad that you kind of touched on that a little bit. So I'll let you continue. And then Christina, what were you about to say?
Well, I was going to say exactly that. That's the thing that stood out to me. It's every time we hear about sickle cell disease, people are talking about SS, and that is that's the genotype that is most impacted. But really, my sister has sickle cell disease, and while she was in the hospital a lot growing up, and she has SS, she wasn't in the hospital every month, right? So I think, to your point, Ijeoma, there are myths to dispel around genotypes and, which one is more severe and not, because, Carla, your example is it really brings that to light for me.
Yeah. So my son has sickle cell beta thal 0, and with having 0, you have less normal A cells. So that's also can, contributes. And then there's biomarkers that also contribute to the factors. So whatever, sickle cell genotype that you have, there's biomarkers, and that can contribute to having more crisis. That can, there's a lot of factors that can contribute. Whereas we see sometimes in the community, those that have a SC, having more frequent crisis and having more complications. We, then even a person that may have SS or beta thalassemia. So it's interesting. It's very interesting how, sickle cell differentiates in everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's even hard to, for me, when I look at research, to see the research done on SS, the most, severe type, and, even treatments, who will that treatment be available? So that's another thing about it, because we'll go to that another time. So who will treatments be available for sickle cell? Because if you're this, this genotype, it may not be available for you. So those kind of conversations. So those things are important also as we advocate in the community. But, it has been an experience to actually see my son go through that era. So we tried the treatment, hydroxyurea at the time, and it didn't, he had a reaction. He didn't do well. Mm-hmm. Had to take him back off. Then, just kind of considering other options, like, man, still, going through the hardship of watching my son go through more hospitalizations and pain, and knowing that no one really talks about this. We talk about complications, and we talk about the silent damage that's occurring inside of the body, right? So we understand that how the bone is deteriorating, right? How it's affecting, all of the organs. So the silent damage was another one of my concerns as I watched him grow up, and just kind of concerning, as my son listened to conversations, even with myself, and teaching him about his body. One thing he said to me, he said, Mom, and came to my room, and he said, Mom, I got to talk to you. And I was like, okay. So he said, I want to go to school. I want to be with my friends and my peers. And he said siblings, because he has siblings. I want to be with my friends and my siblings. I want to go to school like them. And I tried everything within me not to fight back tears. But it brought me to a place of, oh my gosh, how this disease is impacting his life that he knows. And he said, I'm not living my life. Mm-hmm. That took me to tears. And I said, man, I have to help him. And he said, I haven't even met anybody like me. So then I started really you're right. We've connected with cancer groups in our area, particular cancer group. And in the room, the cancer group basically caters to, fun events for kids that have hemoglobin diseases. So when he went to the group, he saw children with, bald heads and, children running around. But we were never introduced to families. We know the families are in the room, but we never got introduced to the families that have sickle cell. I knew them because the work I was doing, support groups and then having an organization. But I was like, you're right. I got to start introducing him. So one of the things I did, I remember taking him to SCDA conference, and it opened his world because he knew that here was my community of people that have the disease like me. I didn't know he could dance like that. Let's say I didn't know he enjoyed himself. And in that year, I want to say in that year, also the year after, I was able to try hydroxyurea again, and it changed our life. He was able to go to school, and then he had no crisis for a whole year. I managed not even any at home. In the fraction of me trying so many other things, I tried herbs. I tried so many. We're Caribbean, so we make our food. Well, I was very cautious all along with him of how I would nurture him and make sure he eats well, and saw different specialists. But that medication did change our life until we also tried other, sickle cell. Sometimes not one cat fits. You have to try other things. And he still then started, sickle cell started to show its face a little, but not as, harsh. So that made the difference in our life.
One of the things that you shared is how he said, Mom, I'm not living my life. And that's one of the things that I've seen, like when it comes to caregivers, you want to protect your child, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like your biggest thing is protection. You don't want them to hurt. You don't want to see them in pain. You don't want to see them. So it's like you shelter them, right? Because you know, like what they're dealing with, like you for yourself know what they're dealing with, but you don't know what they're dealing with because again, it goes back beyond the pain, right? It's the mental anguish. It's the whole thing of not wanting to be seen as weak, not wanting to be seen as different from others, right? And so being able to listen and hear him, how he said that, like, Mom, I want to be able to be with my friends. I want to be with my other siblings. I want to do that. And then taking that into consideration because again, going back to the protection, because I know individuals that have younger children that have sickle cell and they're scared to let their child go to swimming because, like hearing like, oh, they get in the water, like they're going to have a crisis and, just things like that. So I'm glad that you're able to kind of share it from the perspective of a parent and then just hearing the voice of your child. And as he's gotten older, sharing like, okay, these are some of the things I feel that I'm missing out on. And then you listening to him and then you taking it upon yourself to try to find ways to give him that access so that he does feel that he's able to live. And I like how you shared that.
Thanks. And I will fast forward to what you asked me about the Ruby Ball. So, as my son's getting older, I felt like it was so important to educate him on what these new curative therapy options are. Every time he went to the doctor would mention that, there's hope and, maybe one day gene therapy will be for you, and just shared with him. So as he got older, I said, you know what? He's now in the age of transition, 18. I want to talk to him about curative therapies and not only talk to him, but have him sit in with me in sessions to be able to look and see that there are people that have been cured, because COVID actually brought a new era of how we can do things. And even though I was, in the community, being able to go to conferences, I was now being have conferences available to me online. And I would just draw him near and say, hey, watch this with me. And so this is what I did in order to educate him. So I gave him information, but I also let him sit in on the conferences in order to hear from others, because where else are you going to learn? It's not only mommy, right? Giving you information, you're learning from experts and those with the patient experience. So I let him be able to sit in on conferences. And because we also at Kids Conquering Sickle Cell have our sickle cell and chronic pain symposium, I also did a conference included, a curative therapy portion and had panel speakers. So I connected him also to some panel speakers and let him, hear from them directly and talk with them. So just enlightening him and educating him. So I also told him, so you know what? How about we all in the family get tested? So I want to know that if you ever have the chance to, do bone marrow transplants or gene therapy, you have options, but I want you to know that if you have a match in this family, you have that knowledge to make an informative decision. So I did that. We all got tested and talked to the doctor, his hematologist, and at the time he had connected us with another, it was Johns Hopkins, which had sent the test out. And then they contacted me and it was like, well, you have a match in the family. And I was like, okay, wow. And it's like 100% match, and the 100% match was his little brother, 11 years old. So we shared that with him, that he had a match and his 11-year-old brother was a match. And he he was kind of shocked, right? Because we always shocked, but he was shocked. And then he wondered because, his little brother is like, I guess you might as well say small in structure, very strong in the mouth, but small in structure and very intelligent. So he wondered, he was like, he has older sister. So he was like, oh, I was just wondering why isn't, the older one, the match, because he felt like she's older. If he had to make a choice, it would be easier that she's stronger. He felt he's too little. And so he had some weight on his shoulder because he had to think about more. So they wanted to make an appointment and, go in just to talk with him and educate him about what does this mean that you have a match, and also talk with my younger son and just explaining to him. So we went to John Hopkins All Children's in St. Petersburg, which is almost 2 hours from where we are in Orlando area. And so we, kind of spoke with the team, and I will tell you, it was very much overwhelming. It was overwhelming for me because it's a lot of information. It's a lot to take in. You can hear about, the possibility of being cured, but you also have to think about the possibility of something going wrong. They didn't sugarcoat anything. They made sure, told us the possibility, there's a chance of getting graft versus host disease, and the possibility of even death from complications. You just have to know what the good outweighs the bad. That pressure on your mind is a lot. And my son was, very, very overwhelmed. And I can tell even in the meeting, they tried to explain. They did a good job explaining, I must say, but even relaying and trying to explain the information. You have a young adult, one that just graduated from high school, and now learning about curative therapy, started working. So now you have to make tough decisions that if I do this, that I have to quit my job. I just started making, money. Also started college. So thinking I have to interrupt my education in order to, do this process, be away from my friends. I'm just getting a social life where it's not high school. So it's a lot. And then having to wonder about your younger brother being that donor. And I had to also talk with my son because I did not want it to be his younger brother. I did not want it to be, here, mommy's making decision for you, or your brother, you have to do this. No, it have to be something voluntary that he wanted to do and that he understands totally what it involves. Because it's not like just a stick and that's it. It involved much, testing, which is a lot of blood work. It also involved pretty much going under anesthesia for them to go into the marrow in the back, not just one, but two penetration of, holes, being able to extract the bone marrow. So having him to understand that also was something that I thought was very important. And the smart, clever son that he is, even they trying to explain, they don't have enough material to explain that information to a child. That's what I realized, that there was a gap. But also being able to actually talk with him and ask him for him to share how he feels about doing such a procedure, how he feels. He knows pretty much about, his brother having sickle cell. They were so used to me being away, being able to go care for his brother. And they got so used to that that I wanted to make sure I was there to help him understand that what this procedure involved, and knowing that I was going to be there for him, whether he didn't want to do it or did wanted to do this. And so one day I was at the doctor's office, and he takes out his phone and he's like, "Mom, watch this." And I was like, oh, okay. So I look at his phone and he takes out a YouTube video, very detailed, about showing a patient getting bone marrow extracted. And I was just like, wow. So I looked at him because my whole body got tingles. And I was like, "You watched this?" And he said, "Twice." Just confident. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm just beginning to watch it. Literally, I can feel like my whole body feeling different, right? So I'm just like, man, this is a lot. This is a lot, even to know that he would go through such thing. And I asked him, I said, "How do you feel about this?" He said, "Well, if I do, I'll be all right. I'll be asleep."
Aww.
And so that kind of took my heart, that he actually looked for material to research on this.
Right.
And then, told me how he felt. So we went into a conversation asking questions about it. And that's one thing I would say, that when I went in, I had a book of questions. I didn't just, I wrote down every time a question came to mind. I wrote down, what would this look like? What that support look like? You want to make sure mental health support is there. I wanted to make sure that my son actually knew, Shamar, he actually knew what would happen if complications strike. Are there, what medications are used now to combat this? Have you ever had this situation? There's a lot of questions that I went in conversations, even with him and then with his doctor. And I realized that, you grow children to be young adults, even these warriors, and they define the word warrior. What made it for me is one day he said, "Mom, I need you to make an appointment with my doctor. I need to talk with him." I was like, oh, okay. So made that appointment, and he wanted to talk to the bone marrow transplant doctor, and he had some questions. And mind you, in the meeting, when we first had the first meeting, I could tell my son was overwhelmed, not by just facial reaction. In the meeting, by the time I want to say mid of the meeting, he was like this on the table. It was a lot for him. So his body language spoke, right? So I knew he was listening, but I was like, maybe he zoned out because he's like, this is too much. So when he said he wanted to speak to his doctor, he spoke to him and asked him some questions. I was sitting there. He asked him some questions, and he repeated literally, he said word for word a statement he made that, like, if something goes wrong, my son remembered exactly what he said and repeated that as a question. So I said, wow, he didn't zone out at that meeting. He was actually listening, but it was a lot. So I left it to him, and I had a talk with him. I said, listen, I know that your brother is a match. I know that now, your brother is saying that, he's in support of you, but I want you to know, this is your decision. If you don't want to do this, I'm here to support you 100%, because we're looking forward to other treatments, and we can talk about, treatments coming in. And we spoke about gene therapy. And at this facility, if you had a 100% match, then they did have a gene therapy study, but you couldn't qualify for that trial because you had a 100% match. Okay. So that kind of took that off the belt for us. But in that also, I told him I'm 100% in support of whatever you want, right? So just know that I'm here for you. I've been here from day one, and I'll be here all the time for you. So he understood that, and he didn't make a decision right away. I would check in with him now and then and say, "Hey, you okay? Have you're still thinking about, the process?" And he would say, "Yeah, okay, yeah, I am." And I would think, okay, it wasn't much conversation going on about it. So fast forward, a whole year passes. He comes to me and said, "Mom, I want to talk to my doctor. I'm gonna, reach out to my doctor and, make an appointment." So I was like, okay. He was like, "Go ahead, Mom, just email the doctor, tell him I want to speak to him." So I was like, okay. So I go ahead and do that, speak to his doctor, and they made an appointment, and it was a telehealth appointment. And so I was like, okay, great. So I get ready, right? Know the day. I come and we're like, okay, so the appointment's in about 5 more minutes. So I go and knock on his room door. I was like, "I'm ready." He's like, "Mom, no." I'm gonna have this conversation with the doctor. Said, oh, okay. I was taken back. I was like, he's really adulting and I'm not joining the conversation. My heart was actually broken, all right?
Yeah.
So I had to keep it real. I was like, oh. So I was like, wait a minute, this is what we teach them to do, right? But when he actually wanted to have a private meeting, because I always talked about having private conversations with the doctor, the hematologist, they do their thing while I step out. I was used to that, right? But now, when I'm talking by myself, and I was like, okay, this is new. So he spoke to him, and then he came in my room, and I was like, well, I thought I was going to be in a meeting. I told him I thought I was going to be meeting. He was like, no, well, this was just for me and him. And I was like, okay. So I was like, so how did the meeting go? He goes, it was good. I was like, okay. So then he's like, "Mom, I decided to go ahead and, move forward and do it." And I was like, wow. So even getting the news that he wanted to do this, like I had all kinds of emotions. See, you don't get prepared for this. Like, so I was like, yeah, I was very supportive. And I told him, I was like, "I'm here. Let me, know. I know, let me know what the process is going to be, because I know, yeah, I'm going to let you handle this." I said, and talk to the doctor and let me know, when we'll have to go in. And so I did that. So I was like, let's communicate. We'll just be on a group email. Let's communicate appointments and stuff like that. So he said, all right. And we did that. The hard thing is when they reach 18 and they have to sign consent now for you, the caregiver, to have access to information. It's different. It's different.
Your story makes me think about just in general how parents have to deal with, the understanding that their children are getting older, right? And the things that they were responsible for initially, they're not anymore. With, sickle cell, they're not only going through that, but then they're also transitioning from being in like a children's hospital to now having to deal with adult care, which is actually where a lot of the biggest issues and crises happen. So how were you taking on this? I'm guessing at this point you probably knew that like that transition is a hard one.
Yeah, so transition was definitely, and we experienced, because he was still in the pediatric care. So we was experiencing things a little bit different. Even though you're in pediatric center, once you get on the floor, like they knew who I was. They knew, because I already had a partnership with the hospital. They knew him because from he was smaller, a lot of the same staff was there. So he was kind of new that he wasn't there so frequently. So that was kind of new. So when he did go on the floor, it was like, okay. So even in that transition stage, going to the ER, I would say we do more ER visits. Going to the ER, the hospital is awesome, treat him, but it was I started to notice a difference. It's always who's the hospitalist on staff in order how to get things rolling. So, or how they're going to be attentive and pay attention to certain things. So the care at his facility was always, I would say, exceptional, except one particular time when we had a hospitalist on staff that, pretty much wanted to play games, didn't want to give him meds, and kind of gave him, I would never forget, he was in excruciating pain and delayed medication, and gave him some Motrin, and then asked if he was feeling better. Like I wasn't paying attention. Like, you didn't give morphine yet? Like, so, but you have to being the advocate that I was, what he didn't know is that I was jotting down times. You came in here this time, I asked for this, didn't see, the response that was needed. And I had a timeline, and I had to, in that, also compose myself, because I was really about to be on 10. And Shamar kind of know that, and I had to, even in that time, you have to learn how to advocate effectively. So I'm like, okay, he wants to hear from you. So can you tell him this? Can you tell him that he didn't give you morphine yet? That this, it was not morphine at the time, it was Dilaudid. I said, you tell him you didn't get Dilaudid yet, and this is what you need, and you're still in pain. Like, can you communicate this? I know you're in pain. And I know I usually, speak up for you, but because this is a different physician, and he said he wants to hear from you, those were his words, he want to hear from you. When he walks in here, you're going to have to talk. So and those kind of things that I notice.
Yeah, like just even how you said that in terms of that transition, like as a child, it's like you speak for him. You're letting the doctors know, you're letting them know everything. And so when you saw that like change, it's like, oh, now he needs to start speaking for yourself. Because I'll even say, my sister, it's not my child. My sister's 32 years old. So, but I'll still like go, because I feel like she doesn't like speak up for herself at times. So it's like, and you have to like learn to be your own advocate. So it's like, I'll have to catch myself, because I want to be like, this is what she needs. This is what's supposed to happen. This is, you know what I mean? Like this. But then it's like, I have to understand that I had to relinquish the time, because she's never going to truly be able to be an advocate for herself if I don't allow her to experience it, right, for herself, so that she's better able to communicate what her needs are. And so I feel like when I actually like did that, and when my mom actually did that it gave my sister space to actually be like, okay, yeah, you're right. If I don't say this, they're not going to do it, right? If I don't do this, they're not going to do it. So I need to get outside of my timidness, or, you know what I mean? Like my normal, having to let them know like, hey, this is how I'm feeling, so that they can be able to do what it is that I need for them to do in order to ensure that I'm getting the best care. So just even seeing that. So I know that we're like a lot over, we're getting over time, but I wanted to touch on how you kind of shared a little bit about that transition, right? Of when you actually decided, or when your son actually decided, okay, I'm going to do this bone marrow transplant. And so making that decision, how was making that decision for your family? And then what would you say to other parents that are in a similar situation as you, that are caregivers, when it comes to the whole thing of making the decision and allowing your child to be a part of that conversation?
Yeah, I would definitely say education is key. So also letting them learn from the experience of others. There's resources I tapped into, Be the Match, contacted them. They have a great program. Even if you do have a, family member that's a donor, definitely contact Be the Match. There's still resources that you can tap into. They have a navigator that definitely helps with connect you to resources. There's so much to the journey that you have to be prepared for. Financially, the challenges of, losing income because you have to be with your loved one. From also thinking about fertility preservation because of what the chemo does and impacting the possible ability to, be fertile. That's also something he had to think about, and being able to connect with resources for that. I would definitely say that speaking to others and other caregivers, definitely to understand their journey is key. And not only to the caregivers that things went well, find the ones that things did not go so well. You can learn so much from them. And that's what I did. And I would tell you, I was a bag, I present, even though you're in the community, I present on sickle cell. I know complications. But that experience can never prepare me for the journey that I went to, even talking to parents. There was an emotional journey that I went through, learning that when he said yes, and then now counting the days and say, oh my gosh, it's coming close to time. And, there was a whole schedule, right? So they give you a schedule of blood work, you coming back for different things, having organs checked, all these things that, my oldest son, Shamarda, had to go through. And then the same with my younger son. And then, so the emotions of countdown, okay, so he has to get a catheter put in, so a central line, scheduling dates for that. And even for him, he had to actually be hospitalized for that. But then between that, when he got the central line, he started a treatment, and then we was counting down the days till he's going to be hospitalized for the transplant. But we expected to be home, but that didn't happen because after he got, released, he basically had a fever and had something going on that I was like, oh my gosh, here it is. He had to be hospitalized at his children's hospital that was closer to home because he had a fever. I had a Russian there, was trying to figure out that. So he didn't get released until literally the day before transplant, being admitted to the other hospital for transplant. Now, remember, we didn't prepare for that because he was supposed to actually be home. So one of the things that I did, I spoke to them, and basically the plan was for them to get him airlifted to the other hospital straight from the two hospitals. And in that, I had to advocate for him. I let them know that, we didn't prepare for him to be, hospitalized so long, because now we think about 30 days there, but now you added on an extra almost, 2 weeks here. So I told them, I said, because he needs to actually, what would help him for his mental health and able to connect, he need that social with his family to prepare for this adventure. He didn't get that time at home. So I asked if you can allow him to come home for that one night. I will bring him to the other hospital the following day, but he would be able to pack his own clothes, be able to situate himself to get that time in his room, be able to kind of process a whole lot of that will be going on and kind of be prepared. So this was really different to say that the journey of him, making the decision, and as a parent being able to process a lot of this. This was new for me. And for two children now, because it's not only one, for two children. So going through that emotion as a parent, I would definitely say that it's important to get information, connect your child to others, and then also move forward with connecting with the team, asking every question possible. It is important. And learning also from the warrior. Keep checking in. How is their mental health doing? Notice signs and symptoms that if they feel overwhelmed or getting depressed, because it's a lot. It's a lot along this journey.
So I have a question, and I don't know if your son shared this with you. For him, what was the pivotal moment when he said, I want to get a bone marrow transplant? What made him say, okay, thinking about the different options, hydroxyurea, it's been working for me, right? Like, I'm not having as many crises as I used to have. I'm starting to be able to do a little bit more. What was, and then also, like you said, I know that y'all said y'all looked into the idea of being able to do the gene therapy, but he had 100% match, so he wasn't able to get into that program. But what was it that made him say, I know this is for me.
So at the time, he was on 2 other medications, one of the 2 newer ones that was helping him. Can't say it was 100%, didn't keep him out the hospital a whole year. Didn't do that anymore. So when I asked him, so what kind of made the decision for him? For one, he was hospitalized that year. I want to say we literally went on vacation, and he got a crisis on vacation. He kind of minimized it, but I knew he had a crisis. I didn't see him much around. He didn't come out much out of the room, and kind of played it off. And I was like, nah, something ain't right. And so literally when we came back, and that has happened before, when he came back, he had to be hospitalized. When we touched U.S. soil, I should say, he had to be hospitalized. And I think that for him was, what if? What if I don't have to go through that experience? But one of the things I remember talking to him and asking, and he thought about, what if I don't have to deal with this ever again? Like hospitalizations. And we always had some conversations about adult care. So he was going into, I want to say, had another year of being in pediatric care. I've always talked to him about the difference. You might not get the treatment that we're going to hope for the best, but it's going to be very different from here. And so he knew going in, this countdown time for him. The expectation is you're going to adult care. Also, he had a warrior friend that passed away from sickle cell. So he kind of knew in the back of his mind what complications can actually lead to for others, and had it in his head too that it can impact him. That wasn't riding his thoughts so much, but his thought more so was, what can I do if I am cured of this disease? And I asked him, I said, what do you want? What would you do if you never had sickle cell? And he said, I would go into the Air Force. So that was the highlight and a blessing. And, he'd been through the bone marrow transplant. He is now 8 months post bone marrow transplant, doing very well. And I saw a book in his room and it was about the Air Force. So he has that. So, New Horizons. So, he's actually going to a lot of his appointments by himself. So I have, had cut the umbilical cord and allowed him to go to appointments. Before, I used to send his sister with him, but I allow him to, go by himself. And it's even, it's a dull drive for him. But this is part of adulting. And he's doing very well, managing his medications by himself. I'm still that mom that be like, did you take it? Did you take it today? Did you miss any? I am still that mom, but he seems to be managing really well. I do my quiz questions. So did you go pick up that medication? I'm not getting that text. And he's like, yeah, I'm getting it. So I just make sure I kind of follow up and keep up, because they're young adults. So you want to make sure that, you allow them that adulting experience, but you still be that parent to definitely check up. So, he's managing pretty well. So I could say I'm totally proud. It was a transition also for me. And so that's an experience.
Yeah, I was going to say that parenting boat never leaves you, because I'm 40 and my mom still treats me like I'm 10 when it comes to anything around sickle cell. And like how I told you, my sister, she's 32. And I treat her like she's my child when it comes to her dealing with stuff. So it's like that's always, going to be in you. But as you said, your son is cured through the bone marrow transplant. And so we're thankful for his life and for the opportunity for him to have that chance at another chance at life, right? So that he truly, as he shared with you earlier, be able to live.
Right.
So, live again. And so we really appreciate you coming out, sharing the story, and just let us know what this has been for you. as a journey, as a caregiver, as a mother, as an advocate, also for your son as a warrior. And so we truly appreciate your voice, what it is that you've been able to share. And so we're just very, very thankful.
Yeah. I do have one quick question for you, Carla, just as a follow-up to the transplant. You said he's 8 months post transplant, bone marrow transplant. When is he out of the red zone, if you will, or is he already out the red zone? What is that process?
So 100 days is crucial, but they still you monitor it for a whole year.
Okay.
So he has less visits because it was first like every week, then every 2 weeks, and then it spreads out. Now he goes every month. If concerns arise, then it would be they monitor you a little closely. But now it's once a month. He will be monitored up until a year, if more they need, but it's typically a year until they freeze. So now we say 8 months, but having this bone marrow transplant means that it also wiped out the whole immune system. Right. So now in his 8-month mark, I want to say 2 months ago is when he just started getting his immunizations back. I mean, all from when infancy on.
Oh, wow.
Now they're working on that. So he's still cautious of his access to others. I'm cautious of cautious of how I travel, because it's still in that time that, you don't want anything to go wrong, right? Or him getting ill. So that is something that is they're very important to us. He was vaccinated before, he's not vaccinated now. Those things, they're trying to get him caught up with immunizations before he can be vaccinated again, those things. So, we're cautious, very, very cautious. Interesting enough, one of my daughters, her mom is a nurse, and she knew that, he had a bone marrow transplant, and she's like, oh my gosh, my daughter is with your daughter, and my daughter had COVID. Can you please just test your daughter? And I was like, well, my daughter has no signs, but let me go ahead and test her, because anybody has a cough in my house, I'm like testing them. So I test her, and literally my daughter was asymptomatic, and she did have COVID, and they're close. So I was thankful that she noted me prior to, I kept them apart for, 2 weeks, and until she tested, negative, and, he never got COVID. And imagine going through a transplant, and then, so those things you never know, because you have other kids in your house, and because you're keeping other people out of your house, you never know. And so that, we just kind of be cautious about everything right now, because this is still a crucial time. Even though he's 8 months, he still wears his mask when he goes out, N95 mask, not just any mask, N95 mask. So when he's around others, he's still cautious that you can't order food. They don't want you ordering food from the restaurant. You get food prepared. You can't have food sitting down, because it can build bacteria, all those things. Restaurant food, know that they're gonna, if you're going to a restaurant right now, I think they gave him permission, you could have them cook it fresh right away, so this way it's there. There's certain things. One of the things he was like, we went to Chick-fil-A so often, because that's the place that would make it right away and to be able to make it fresh. That he was very limited. Other than that, you're going to eat home food. That's it. And just love it. And let's love on it. So just knowing your limits and him having to adapt to that. He did that also too as a teen. And just noting too, you can't have just anybody around you. And if you're sick, I was always like that with him as a child with sickle cell. If you're sick, your child's sick, please keep them away. But I'm even so much more conscious now. So, and he has to be that way as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah, this has definitely been a really insightful conversation for sure. I know that we are over, but I do have just one last question for you, and that's just about advocacy and how people can be connected to you and the work that you do, and perhaps if there are any upcoming events that you want to share with us.
Yes. So I want to say first, thank you to the Ruby Ball for providing the scholarship. Shamar was selected for that, and it really helped with this journey of bone marrow transplant. There's so much that you don't understand or know. We were an hour and more away for travel for the hospital. So even when we was able to, and one thing I have to mention, once you live so far, once you're going through treatment, you cannot come home. So even though he got released from the hospital after staying in there for almost a month, we had to be by the hospital. So they don't trust, you can't get an emergency. They have to know you can get to that treating hospital. So being able to provide housing was so important to me. And there was a time that when my other son got, he had a hard experience. We didn't prepare for that. He had a hard experience healing when he got through. So we actually had to stay in a hotel when Shamar was getting his new cells. We had to stay in a hotel because we had to have access in order to wheelchair my other son, because it was hard for him. He couldn't walk or anything. So the experience was very hard on his body. We didn't expect that. Most people, it took him about 3 weeks to be out of school in order to heal. And that's really not the typical norm for children, even though he got athletic. And interesting enough, his body actually had a growth spurt when Shamar was ready for transplant. I was like, that must be only God, because this boy's body started to be, it's almost same height as me and everything. So he had a real growth spurt. So I feel like it's only God prepared his body, and they were the same weights when they went in to be weighed. But I want to thank you for that, because when we think about fertility preservation and all the other expenses that come, this grant was definitely helpful to our family. And just transportation, being able to come back and forth, using, gas used up very frequently when you're at hospital, providing lunch and all that stuff when you're there all day. Those things are very needed for the family, and bills don't stop when you're in the hospital. So, having to cut down and still be the caregiver was definitely a challenge, but with every resource is definitely helpful. The question that you asked was, what events for Kids Conquering Sickle Cell Disease Foundation on June 22nd. We are going to have an in-person symposium, our Sickle Cell and Chronic Pain Symposium. We've been having it virtually for the last 2 years. And so we're going back in person. And so I'm excited. So that will be in Orlando, Florida. And so we are excited about that. And for us, I will definitely say we have more events. We have the Empowered Caregivers, which is still virtual. Our next one will be in April 22nd. So that will also be in full force coming up. And we usually have 3 sessions. So we have so much going on. You can reach us at www.kidsconqueringscd.org. That's our website. And on social media, Kids Conquering Sickle Cell Disease Foundation. And also, on Instagram, Kids Conquering SCD. And we're also on Twitter and LinkedIn. So we are on many platforms so that you can contact us and keep updated with what's going on. We connecting to the community because we know how important education is, and connecting with other families and supportive resources is really, really the key to helping our families and warriors go through this time, and know that there's a village out there that's going through a similar experience, and we're here to support.
Thank you so much, Carla. We truly appreciate you, and we look forward to staying connected with you, supporting you in your upcoming events. Like I said, growing up, I didn't have any of this, right? It was, all I knew was my twin brother and my younger sister. And that's all that we had. So it's good to know, just like how you said that your son's doctor said, there's hope. Right. And so that's how I want to end it. There's hope. There's so many different things that's going on. And just like you shared, your word for this podcast, for your sickle cell journey, triumph. And so you've triumphed through this. Your son has triumphed through this to the point of a cure. And so that's what people always talk about, what they seek. Like, we're looking for a cure for sickle cell. And it's so good to know, like, there's so many different options that exist now, right, for individuals living with sickle cell, so that they have choices that didn't exist before. Yes. And so thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for allowing us into your world, into your son's life, just so that you can encourage and inspire others, because that's part of what we're here for. And that's part of why we have this podcast, is because we want to encourage and inspire other individuals living with sickle cell, other caregivers that are taking care of people with sickle cell, that so that they know, like, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You know, you will triumph through this. And as things start to transition, as things start to move, there's hope, and there's a lot of things that are coming down the pipeline for sickle cell. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, so encouraging. So encouraging. I would definitely say that there are breakthrough treatments coming. So there's so much hope. And just like my journey, you know, my son started on one medication and was able to access others until he was able to access the, you know, curative therapy. So looking for more stories just like this, even on this podcast, and just hearing from others as we learn through experiences. I thank you for this time and having this platform.
Thank you, Carla.